Welcome to Time in History. I'm Professor Bill. History remembers the Cold War as a long standoff, decades of tension, speeches, and negotiations. But there were moments when it almost ended everything. Tonight, we are not talking about politics. We are talking about minutes. Minutes when nuclear weapons were ready. Minutes when confusion could have erased cities. 3 dates, 3 decisions, and a world that survived, narrowly. Look closely. October 1962. Americans opened their newspapers and saw the words, Soviet missiles in Cuba. Within days, U.S. forces were raised to DEFCON 2, one level below nuclear war. Strategic bombers were airborne. Missiles were on alert. Most citizens had no idea how little room for error actually remained. Inside the White House, President Kennedy met with his executive committee. Military leaders proposed immediate airstrikes on Cuba. Some urged invasion. Kennedy rejected both, at least for the moment. Instead, he chose a naval quarantine, knowing that one miscalculation could trigger a nuclear exchange. U.S. Navy ships formed a blockade line around Cuba. Soviet vessels were approaching. Both sides carried nuclear weapons. If even one commander misread an order, escalation could have been immediate. But the most dangerous decision that week was not made on the surface. While the world watched the surface, 4 Soviet submarines moved quietly near Cuba. One of them was B-59. Unknown to U.S. forces, it carried a nuclear torpedo. The submarine had lost reliable contact with Moscow. Inside, the crew had no clear picture of what was happening above them. On October 27th, U.S. destroyers detected B-59. They began dropping practice depth charges, small explosive signals meant to force the submarine to surface. The Americans did not intend to start a war. But inside the submarine, the explosions sounded like the beginning of one. Conditions inside B-59 were extreme. Temperatures reportedly exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The crew had been submerged for days. They did not know whether nuclear war had already begun above them. Captain Valentin Savitsky believed they were under attack. He considered launching the nuclear torpedo. Soviet protocol required agreement from senior officers. 2 were prepared to authorize it. 1 officer hesitated. Vasily Arkhipov. Arkhipov argued that they had no confirmation of war. He refused to authorize the launch. B-59 eventually surfaced. The nuclear torpedo was never fired. The world did not know how close it had come. The torpedo aboard B-59 was not a warning shot. It carried a nuclear warhead, roughly comparable in power to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. If it had detonated against a U.S. destroyer, Washington would have had no way of knowing it came from a single submarine. In 1962, that likely would have meant retaliation, fast and massive. At the same time, American nuclear bombers were already in the air. Missile crews were on alert. DEFCON 2 meant the next step was launch readiness. Both superpowers were primed for escalation. All it would have taken was one confirmed nuclear detonation. October 27th is often called Black Saturday. On that same day, a U.S. U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. Its pilot was killed. In another part of the Arctic, a second U-2 accidentally crossed into Soviet airspace. Events were stacking up faster than leaders could control them. Kennedy and Khrushchev were exchanging urgent messages, sometimes hours apart. But neither controlled every commander in the field. Submarines, pilots, radar operators. They were making decisions in real time. And sometimes, those decisions were based on incomplete information. The crisis ended days later, with a negotiated compromise. Missiles were removed. War was avoided. But many of the most dangerous details remained classified for decades. The world only later learned how close miscalculation had come to ending it. September 26, 1983. Just after midnight, outside Moscow. The Cold War was tense again. 3 weeks earlier, on September 1st, the Soviet Union had shot down Korean airlines Flight 007. Relations with the United States were at one of their lowest points since 1962. That night, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was on duty at Serpukhov 15. It was a secret bunker responsible for monitoring satellite early warning systems. If the system detected incoming U.S. missiles, he had minutes to report it up the chain of command. From there, retaliation could begin. At 00:14 a.m., September 26, 1983, the alarm sounded. The system reported a U.S. intercontinental ballistic missile launch. Petrov looked at the screen. Then the system reported a second missile, and then more. Within minutes, the system indicated 5 incoming missiles. According to protocol, this was to be reported immediately as a confirmed attack. The Soviet response doctrine assumed that retaliation must follow quickly, before missiles hit their targets. Petrov understood the weight of what he was seeing, but something felt wrong. Why would the United States launch only 5 missiles in a first strike? A real nuclear attack would involve hundreds. Ground radar had not yet confirmed the launches. Petrov hesitated. The alarm system was part of the OKO satellite network. Later investigations concluded the satellites had mistaken sunlight, reflecting off high clouds for missile launches. At the time, Petrov did not know that. He had minutes and no certainty. At approximately 00:28, Petrov made his decision. He reported the alarm as a false signal. He went against strict protocol. If he had been wrong, retaliation might have been delayed too long. If he had been right, he may have prevented nuclear war. Stanislav Petrov was not publicly celebrated in 1983. In fact, the incident remained classified. He was later questioned by superiors and quietly reassigned. The Soviet Union did not want to admit that its early warning system had nearly triggered catastrophe. The world would not hear his name until the 1990s. To understand the danger of that night, we have to look at 1983 as a whole. On September 1st, 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 was shot down by Soviet forces. Earlier that year, NATO had begun deploying Pershing 2 missiles in Europe. Tensions were high. Trust was almost gone. In March 1983, President Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Both sides were modernizing nuclear arsenals. Military exercises were becoming more realistic. Each move was interpreted through suspicion. By autumn, the Cold War atmosphere was thick with fear. In November 1983, NATO planned a command post exercise called Able Archer 83. It would simulate nuclear release procedures. To Western planners, it was routine. To Soviet intelligence, it looked increasingly real. And this time, fear would not come from a computer glitch, but from interpretation. From November 7th to November 11th, 1983, Able Archer unfolded across Europe. Messages moved through real command channels. Procedures mimicked actual nuclear launch protocols. Soviet leadership watched closely, and some believed this might not be an exercise at all. On November 7th, 1983, NATO began Able Archer 83. It was a command post exercise designed to simulate nuclear release procedures. Unlike routine drills, this one included new levels of realism: encrypted communications, high-level participation. From the outside, it did not look ordinary. At that time, Soviet intelligence was already on alert. A secret program known as Operation Ryan had been monitoring signs of a possible Western first strike. When Able Archer began, it matched several of the indicators Moscow feared most. The timing amplified suspicion. During the exercise, some Soviet nuclear-capable units were reportedly placed on heightened readiness. Certain air units in Eastern Europe increased alert status. Missile forces monitored the situation closely. This was not public. It remained buried in classified archives for years. From November 7th to November 11th, the simulation escalated step by step. Messages mimicked the real authorization chain for nuclear weapons. To NATO, This was controlled training. To Soviet observers, it looked dangerously authentic. In a climate of distrust, perception mattered as much as intent. Able Archer ended on November 11, 1983. No missiles were launched, no war began. But later, declassified documents suggested that Soviet leadership had seriously feared a surprise attack. For the third time in 2 decades, the world had come closer than most people ever realized. In November 1983, the Soviet Union was led by Yuri Andropov. He had been a former head of the KGB. His worldview was shaped by suspicion of Western intentions. By that autumn, he reportedly believed the United States might attempt a first strike. Able Archer did not happen in a vacuum. According to later intelligence assessments, certain Soviet air units capable of carrying nuclear weapons were placed on higher alert. Aircraft were reportedly prepared for rapid deployment. These were precautionary measures, but they signaled genuine concern. Both sides were reading each other's movements carefully. At the time, U.S. officials did not fully grasp how seriously Moscow viewed the exercise. It was only later, through intelligence reviews and declassified material, that analysts concluded the Soviets had feared a real attack. Perception, once again, had narrowed the margin for error. By late 1983, Europe was saturated with intermediate-range nuclear missiles. U.S. Pershing, 2 systems were being deployed. Soviet SS-20 missiles were already operational. Flight times between launch and impact were measured in minutes. In such conditions, hesitation could be fatal, and so could overreaction. Unlike 1962 or the Petrov incident in September 1983, Able Archer did not involve a single dramatic decision. Instead, it revealed something more subtle: how mistrust and realism in military planning could combine dangerously. No one intended to start a war, but intention is not always what determines outcomes. After the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, both sides understood how close they had come. In 1963, Washington and Moscow established the direct hotline communication link. The goal was simple: reduce delays and misunderstandings between leaders. Because in 1962, hours had mattered. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, arms control agreements followed. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, strategic arms limitation talks in the 1970s. Each agreement attempted to stabilize a system built on deterrence, but deterrence always carried risk. The logic of mutually assured destruction depended on speed. If one side believed missiles were incoming, it had minutes to respond. This compressed timeline made mistakes more dangerous. Technology reduced uncertainty, but never eliminated it. Many of the details about 1962 and 1983 became public only after the Cold War ended in 1991. Declassified Soviet and American documents revealed just how fragile the situation had been. For decades, the public knew only part of the story. Only years later did names like Vasily Arkhipov and Stanislav Petrov become known outside military circles. They were not presidents. They were not generals. But in critical moments, their judgment mattered. History sometimes turns on individuals few people recognize. In the early 1980s, millions of people protested nuclear weapons across Europe and the United States. They feared escalation. They feared accidents. What they did not know was how close the system had already come to testing their fears. In October 1986, at the Reykjavik summit, U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev discussed deep nuclear reductions. Talks nearly collapsed, but they marked a turning point. The momentum toward de-escalation grew after the dangerous years of 1983. In 1987, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty eliminated an entire class of missiles from Europe. It was one of the first agreements to actually destroy nuclear weapons, not just limit them. The memory of close calls shaped these negotiations. By 1991, the Cold War formally ended with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The nuclear standoff that had defined decades slowly transformed. But the weapons did not disappear overnight. The system remained. Today, thousands of nuclear warheads still exist worldwide. Launch systems remain operational. Early warning networks still monitor the skies. The difference now is experience. History has shown how narrow the margin can be. October 27, 1962. September 26, 1983. November 7th to 11th, 1983. 3 separate moments, 3 different circumstances. In each case, nuclear weapons were ready, and uncertainty was high. In 1962, it was a submarine commander under pressure. In September 1983, it was a satellite system and one officer's judgment. In November 1983, it was interpretation during a military exercise. The technology differed. The risk remained the same. Nuclear deterrence was designed to prevent war through fear of retaliation. But deterrence depends on rational decisions under extreme stress. History shows how quickly confusion, assumption, or technical error can narrow the margin for survival. For decades, many of these details remained hidden in classified archives. Only after the Cold War ended did researchers piece together how close certain nights had been. The public memory of the era is often simplified. The reality was more fragile. The Cold War ended in 1991, but the lessons of 1962 and 1983 remain relevant. Nuclear systems still exist, human judgment still matters, and history reminds us that sometimes the difference between survival and catastrophe is measured in minutes.